what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It is Thursday, November 2nd, 2017. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have got lots and lots of stuff to talk about today. So let's just get right on into it. Apparently, this situation over around Mueller is beginning to really deteriorate because after all this work, after all the investigation, after all the pro-Hillary people on the staff, all they came up with were these indictments against Manafort and Gates, which had nothing to do with Russia, nothing to do with Trump, and basically underscores the fact that they didn't find anything, which is what Mueller was out there to do, was to find anything to link Trump to Russia, and they completely failed. And they're still out there pushing on this idea that Russia somehow hacked the DNC and Podesta emails. We know that absolutely did not happen because the speed with which the files were copied off, whoever did it had to be in the room, which of course points back here to Seth Rich, who was shot in the back and declared a botched robbery. So anyway, the situation is getting really kind of ugly where people were looking for investigation, and all of a sudden a lot of the involved computer equipment turns out to have disappeared. And this is where Imran Awad comes on in, because remember when he was attempting to flee the country, what alerted everybody was a neighbor spotted all this computer equipment with property of government, property of DNC stickers in the trash, and it had been forcibly smashed up. And even Debbie Wasserman Schultz had all of her computer devices smashed when police threatened to seize them. So there is something definitely going on over there, which Mueller is pointedly, not interested in looking at. And it's time for us to take a closer look at Mueller himself and his background. Now, of course, the Corbett media is out there saying, oh, he's a man of honor and integrity and former head of the FBI, and how could you ever doubt him? But as a matter of fact, remember the BCCI scandal? And it turned out that many of the corporate media, including BBC and the New York Times, were out there pointing out how Mueller was involved in that investigation, and he failed to aggressively prosecute it. And we know BCCI was tied in with CIA drug money laundering, and basically Larry Klayman said, Robert Mueller first hit my radar because of that BCCI. And there's also the issue that apparently Mueller was squashing warning signs that may have stopped 9/11. And a lot of people have come forward, including a whistleblower, Colleen Rowan, I think her name is, we'll talk about her a little bit later in the show, saying that there had, in fact, been all kinds of intelligence that 9/11 was going to happen. And Mueller was then the director of the FBI, and he was actively working to try and keep all of this stuff out of the media, out of the public eye. So this guy is dirty going all the way back. Mueller was the one who allowed the escape of Saudi persons connected to Osama bin Laden, and then apparently entrapping innocent people for public relations purposes. Remember all these incidents where the FBI informants were setting these patsies up, talking them into trying to commit an act of terror, then they'd be arrested and they'd get all this newspaper coverage? This was all a fraud. And Mueller was behind all of that. Now, during the Iraq War, of course, Mueller was over there helping to sell this whole idea that Iraq was building weapons of mass destruction. And basically, Dick Cheney was alleging all of this stuff out there. And the CIA, FBI, Mueller, and all of it was working under the then Deputy Attorney General at the time, James Comey. See, it's all the same players keep showing up over and over and over again. Mueller was in charge of the FBI during the anthrax frame-ups. Remember Stephen Hatfield? So this guy really is very, very dirty. And so he's the perfect person to lead a hatchet squad against Donald Trump. Now, there's a whistleblower, Colleen Rowley, and basically said Mueller was chosen as special counsel because he will do what the powerful people want him to do. And he was covering up all those early warnings about 9/11. So we've got these whistleblowers coming forward and saying this guy he's a hatchet man. He's an errand boy. Now, Hannity has blown open a story that we need to pay attention to. Apparently, Mueller's right-hand man has signed a plea deal agreement in the Clinton Uranium One case. Now, this apparently, Fox News legal contributor Greg Jarrett discovered both Deputy Attorney General Ron Rosenstein, who appointed Mueller to be this special counsel, even though he lacked legal justification to do so, and Mueller's right-hand man, Andrew Weissman, former head of the fraud unit at Obama Holder's Justice Department, signed the plea agreement of the Russian businessman embroiled in the Clinton Uranium One case. They're trying to cover that up, trying to make it go away. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Now, we have talked before about whether or not Mueller's special counsel investigation is even legitimate, because the special counsel statute, the special counsel, the independent counsel law, requires there to be a preliminary investigation saying that there is a cause, there's legal reasons to move forward with a special counsel, an independent counsel. That never happened. And now it turns out the independent counsel law expired in 1999. It's been dead and gone for 18 years, and yet they just dragged it out of the coffin and said, yeah, we're going to use this one again to go after Donald Trump. Now, the Supreme Court ruled on the independent counsel law 8-1. The dissenting opinion was Justice Antonin Scalia. And basically he said the problem with this independent counsel law is it made it too easy to falsely call one's political opponent a crook. And when the law sunsetted in 1999, both Republicans and Democrats were very happy about it. And obviously what we're seeing happen with Mueller shows how accurate Scalia's forecast was. Now, we're getting a report that Trump is privately blaming Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, for the chain of events that led to Mueller's indictments against Manafort and Gates. Now, the White House is now officially denying it and saying Trump's not angry with anybody. But apparently the New York Times reported that Kushner, along with his wife Ivanka Trump, also pushed Trump to hire Manafort, who was needed to fill the spot of Trump's initial campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, after Ivanka reportedly gave her father an ultimatum to fire him. So Trump's own family appears to be working against him, which I guess when you've got that much money and power on the line, like I said, looking at what's going on with all of this Uranium One and the Clintons and everything, it's like taking Game of Thrones, House of Cards, Versailles, and mixing them all together. That's how bad it really is. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Jim in Chicago. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Real quick question. I was reading in a paper today, the Jerusalem Post. Why is Israel bombing Syria almost every single day? Are they looking to get into a war with Syria, or this is another way of maybe getting America involved in a war against Syria and Iran?
I would say that that's the most likely outcome here. Israel's trying to provoke Syria into fighting back, at which point the United States would have an excuse to go back into Syria saying, we must defend our friend Israel. And we'll be talking about Syria a little bit later in the show, but it's very obvious the U.S. has not given up yet on finding some way to turn that situation around and steal Syria from the Syrian government and the Syrian people.
Right. And the final point, not point but question, this guy that Trump is going to head the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, you know, this is a guy that was appointed by Barack Obama to be a governor. Do you have any information about this guy?
Well, unfortunately, it does suggest that Trump is not going to stand up to the Federal Reserve. He's just putting another Federal Reserve person into that chairmanship, and so we're not going to see anything change there.
That's what I thought. All right, thank you very much.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now, getting on back to the corruption stories here. Do you remember when the House Intelligence Committee was trying to get a look at classified documents related to that now discredited anti-Trump dossier? And they said, we want a closed-door meeting. We want to look at it. at the Justice Department, and Democrats on the committee who had argued all year there was no need for a subpoena, we don't need to see these documents, there's nothing there. Well, now that they're actually there, the first ones to show up for the private viewing of the documents were the Democrats. They are desperate to see what's actually in there, because this dossier was created by so-called opposition research firm Fusion GPS, funded by the Clinton campaign, funded by the Democratic National Committee, and possibly Obama for America in 2016. So they're still trying to keep the lid on that. And the Democrats are still coming up with all of these lame excuses why we shouldn't investigate Uranium One, why we shouldn't go there at all. And we've had these ideas that somehow it's illegal for Trump to investigate Uranium One and the dossier while he himself is under investigation, which didn't pass muster. We've literally had Democrats begging people like Tucker Carlson, please don't go there. There's no there. Please don't do that. The latest one here is, as usual, we're going to blame the Russians on this one. And apparently Democratic Representative Eric Swalwell of California said that investigating Uranium One or investigating the dossier, it's only going to help the Russians create further discord in our society. That is complete and utter nonsense. It is the Uranium One deal and the dossier that are creating discord in our society. It is all the constant lies that are creating discord in our society. It is the growing wealth and power inequality that is creating discord in our society. Russia has got nothing to do with it. And if we are a nation of laws, which is what we are always told we are, then yes, the Uranium One deal needs to be investigated. The dossier needs to be investigated. Hillary's email server needs to be investigated. The possible espionage involving that email server all needs to be investigated. And you can smell the panic coming out of the political elite right now. Roger Stone is now reporting Jeb Bush is out there predicting Trump will be gone by December, meaning it's going to happen this month, supposedly, whatever it is. Whether the Antifa civil war this Saturday is going to drive Trump out, which I seriously doubt. And again, and I will be the first to admit, this is really, really out there. But Trump is on his way to Asia. He's going to be on the ground here in Oahu this Saturday, and then he's going to be flying off to Asia. What if rogue elements of our government shot Air Force One down and blamed North Korea for it? That would solve a lot of their problems. War with North Korea and all this investigation about Uranium One and all the rest of it would just go away. Far-fetched, I grant you, but we cannot rule it out as absolutely impossible. Let's take another phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
If you see Trump, you're going to say aloha, Nakbar?
I don't know that Trump is actually going to be out in public anywhere. I know he's meeting with local Republican Party leadership, and he's going to be apparently touring the Arizona and everything. I have no intention of trying to meet him. I would have loved to have met him before my disillusionment, but unfortunately Claire and I have a funeral on Saturday anyway, so I'm not available to do anything.
Hey, Mike, on Trump, I got to disagree with some of the callers coming and say, you know, he done some things good or this or that, or the economy's doing great at 3%. It's all phony, baloney numbers. The economy's still in the same shape it was before Trump was in.
Yes,
it's
just
worse. Manipulated.
It's worse. It's going. They can't stop it. They can't stop the collapse. All they're trying to do is saying if we can get into a major world war before it collapses, then we can duck the blame for having ruined the economy, because that's what they did back in 1907 and 1929.
Yeah, that's why Trump has made a big mistake, because remember during the election, he was like, we're in a big fat bubble. Everybody remembers what he says. And then all of a sudden he gets in, all of a sudden the stock market's doing great. The stock market's doing great because companies are buying free money with 0% interest, and they're cranking up their stocks with it. That's it. They're not investing in the country's infrastructure at all.
No, they're not. It's market rigging games all over Wall Street, and the stock market is completely disconnected from the real economic lifeline of the American people.
Yeah, because you got homeless tents If it was doing so great, those homeless tents would be all being packed up. People would be back to work, but they're not. You got a lot of, part-time jobs. That's not going to pay the bills. What are you going to get? 3-4 jobs? You're a debt slave then. You're a debt slave. So people need to start thinking. Trump's been captured. He's been captured, or he's part of the tribe. I don't know. I voted for him, but you know what? The system's rigged. I think we've all come to that conclusion that whoever gets in, it's hopeless, man. It's just hopeless, Mike. It's just it's such a rigged game, and I don't think anything's going to happen to Hillary or any of those people, because they got their groupies in there and their fellow travelers, and I just don't think anything's going to happen to them.
Well, I got to be very honest. Looking at their current reactions right now and what they're doing, I don't think they share your confidence. I think they're seriously afraid that something could happen, that somebody could turn on them, and it may have happened. We're going to be talking about that in a little bit.
I hope so, Mike. But I'm getting to the point where I get so mad now because of just this corruption. And it's not just they're corrupt; they ruin the country and they ruin the West. Them and their group in England and France and Germany and all those other Western countries that are they don't give a crap about the regular person. I think everybody pretty much calling in by now can figure that out. But all right, thanks, Mike. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. And when government becomes corrupt and government sees that the nation itself might start to fall apart, what do? They start looting and plundering left and right, and that seems to be the phase we're in right now. But again, we're seeing a lot of cracks appear in that facade of the deep state here. They're exposed now. The rock has been rolled on over, and the American people are looking at what's wriggling around in the slime underneath there. Now, do you remember when it first came on out that the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC had funded this Fusion GPS? They used a law firm as a cutout, which may open them up to money laundering charges, to go on out and find this Christopher Steele who ginned up this dossier, apparently now out of thin air. And Hillary Clinton came on out and said, oh, absolutely, I had no idea. We certainly had nothing to do with it. Well, the paper trail goes back to them. So now Hillary's out there saying, yes, we funded the Trump dossier, and it was legitimate for us to do it, and we're still evaluating, the provenance of the report. In other words, she's out there saying, yeah, we funded it. We still think it tells the truth. Now, here's where it starts to get interesting, where the cracks are starting to show. Twitter is now admitting that they buried tweets involving the Podesta emails or the DNC emails ahead of the presidential election. If you are out there on Twitter posting comments about what was in those leaked emails, nobody else was seeing them. Twitter was censoring them, and now they're admitting it. They may even actually still be proud of it. Yes, we helped protect the Hillary beast and so forth. Now, as you know, there was a real big stink supposedly of all these Russian-linked ads that were run by entities that were linked back to Russia because the guy with the ads, lawyers, accountants, hairdressers, girlfriend knew somebody's nephew over in Russia. Facebook is now confirming that the vast majority of these so-called Russian ads were actually against Donald Trump. And we'd reported this before. Most of the ads were actually on specific topics of the election, not the candidates. The ads about the candidates favored Hillary Clinton, and Facebook is now confirming it. All of these so-called Russian ads were favoring Hillary Clinton and against Donald Trump. So it raises a whole bunch of new questions. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And Fox News has found yet another corruption over at the Clinton Foundation. And apparently shortly after Hillary Clinton left the Obama administration, the State Department quietly took steps to purchase real estate in Nigeria from a firm whose parent company is owned by a major donor to the Clinton Foundation. And again, this is just a lot of skullduggery, where the State Department is doing business with people even after Hillary had left as Secretary of State. They're giving favorable treatment to donors to the Clinton Foundation. Now, here may be the opening salvo in, shall we say, the war against the deep state. It turns out Donna Brazile has decided to come clean. And yes, there's a book deal involved with it, so let's be honest about it. But remember, Donna Brazile was appointed the interim Democratic National Committee chairwoman after Debbie Wasserman Schultz was forced to step down following the leak of the DNC emails. And Donna Brazile is out there saying that she found proof that Hillary rigged the race against Bernie Sanders. So even without the hidden emails and everything, it's out there now. And what Donna Brazile is saying is that Hillary Clinton's campaign took over the Democratic National Committee even before the primaries began, because the Democratic National Committee was heavily in debt. And Hillary basically came on in and said, I will help you get out of your debt, but you're going to do what I tell you to do. And so Donna Brazile is out there saying that she found absolute proof that the DNC and Hillary rigged the primaries against Bernie Sanders. So probably not going to see that on the corporate media, but it's out there. Last year's election was a monumental fraud. And it was Hillary and the DNC who were doing all these things, and now they're trying to say, oh, no, it wasn't us, it was Trump. So those evil Republicans, we would never do anything like that. We're Democrats. Now, the good news is, according to Forbes' list of the most powerful women on earth, Hillary Clinton has now plummeted to 65th. When she was Secretary of State, she held the number 2 position behind Angela Merkel, who's still number 1. But apparently, British Prime Minister Theresa May is now in the number 2 spot. But as far as Forbes is concerned, Hillary's influence is very much on the wane. Now, getting on back to what happened in Manhattan, and I don't want to get caught up on who saw this and whether it was really screaming Aloha Snack Bar. But again, this idea that this supposed fanatical terrorist had a girlfriend, 3 kids, and was carrying a paintball gun and a BB gun, it feels like another staged incident, like Las Vegas. And they're pushing the terror angle here because the USA Patriot Act is up for renewal. And if they don't have a terror attack with which to push that agenda, then the USA Patriot Act is going to sunset. But if we take what happened in New York at face value, it basically tells us the war on terror has failed. First and foremost, because it happened. An act of terror happened. Now, our suspect is a legal immigrant from Uzbekistan, a country not on the United States fear-mongering terrorist nation list. And remember, this was first reported as both a truck attack and a shooting. And they had to pull back off the shooting when it turned out all he had was the BB gun and the paintball gun. So who was out there saying, oh yeah, people were shot, people were shot? It was all over the media. People have been shot. What, with a paintball? And notice the difference in reporting between what happened in New York and what happened in Las Vegas. In Las Vegas, where it was this white guy, no, it's not an act of terror. It's not an act of terror. It's only an act of terror when it fits the narrative for U.S. propaganda supporting United States foreign policy. For all we know, what happened in New York yesterday was road rage or a bad reaction to prescription antidepressants. But they're going to be out there pushing that terror theme to keep you scared, to keep you dependent, to try and get an extension on the USA Patriot Act. It's all propaganda. We'll be right back after these few words. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, as you know, this Saturday is supposed to be the big beginning of Antifa's civil war to get Donald Trump and Mike Pence out of the White House, and they've got websites all over the place, and they've got events scheduled in a lot of cities across the country, including right here in Honolulu. And as I mentioned earlier in the week, the local Republican Party actually sent out an email saying, do not go down and attend this event, because their intelligence is that agent provocateurs disguised as Trump supporters are going to try and start violence, which is exactly what Antifa wants to see happen. Now, remember, we had that story that broke earlier in the week, how the leaders of Antifa went to the G20 to meet with the leaders of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So they're all part of that same group, that same mind think. And they are very well funded. This is not a grassroots movement. And Alex Jones reported on how somehow Antifa came up with enough money for a complete whole-page ad in the New York Times. Now, interestingly enough, Salon came on out and said Alex Jones was lying. So on one of his more recent broadcasts, he held up the newspaper. It's a full-page ad. That's a lot of money. Screaming about, come and join us. It's the beginning of the end of Donald Trump. And I'm hoping it'll fizzle the way the riots they tried to start right after the election did. But it's very obvious there is a huge push on this. There's a lot of money being poured into it. They're probably hiring a lot of crisis actors and agent provocateurs to try and get something going. I'm very alarmed that Donald Trump is going to be out of the country while all of this is going down. But we need to basically get on out there. I'm going to be reposting that story about how Antifa met with the leaders of Al-Qaeda and ISIS at the G20. And that needs to go everywhere on social media. And hopefully Reddit and Twitter and Facebook and everything won't be trying to shut that one down. So maybe you ought to use your email or just talk to people about it. Because Antifa is not working for the United States of America. They're working for the globalists. Now, getting on over to the war zones, the Russians are kind of scratching their heads because, as you know, Syrian civilians are now leaving the city of Deir ez-Zor, now that it's been freed from ISIS by the Syrian army. And they're basically heading back to their homes. But James Gerard, the commander of the Special Operation Forces of the Coalition, said that these people are fleeing from the Syrian army. They're not fleeing from the ISIS terrorists. They were perfectly happy living under ISIS. Now they're leaving because they're afraid of the Syrian army. And Moscow is saying the geography doesn't line up. They're going back to their homes. They're not heading to a stronghold of ISIS. And it looks like the U.S. is once again going to be trying to push that idea about, oh, Assad is an evil, cruel tyrant. His people hate him, and they're afraid of him. We've got to go on in there and rescue those poor Syrian people from their own elected leaders. Now, there's been a lot of concern over some drone incidents over the Golan Heights. A lot of fingers pointing back and forth, and now the true culprit has stepped up to see mea maxima culpa, and it turns out to be Switzerland. And apparently Switzerland has now admitted sending staff to test reconnaissance drones on the contested lands in the Golan Heights held by Israel. And this, of course, is an embarrassment to everybody who was saying, oh, it was Syria, it was Lebanon, it was Israel. And it's an embarrassment for Switzerland, which has been trying to maintain this status of an honest, impartial broker in the Middle East, now that everybody knows the U.S. is no longer impartial in the Middle East. So that was a bit of an embarrassment there. Anyway, the Syrian government forces are now clearing northern Deir ez-Zor from ISIS. That is pretty much over. And a lot of the people who were in Deir ez-Zor, they can't go back to Raqqa. There's nothing left there. If you look at photos of Raqqa following all the U.S. bombing, it looks like the aftermath of Dresden in World War II. But basically, the Syrian government forces are now going to shift their focus to basically getting the rest of the western bank of Euphrates freed from ISIS. So that's the battle line over there. Once again, Israel has violated Lebanese airspace to strike Syria. We had the caller earlier in the show. Basically flying into Lebanon without Lebanon's permission. Lebanon keeps complaining. The UN keeps doing nothing. And they flew over eastern Lebanon and conducted an airstrike into the rural area of Homs, supposedly targeting a factory there. And what I think is going on is Israel is desperate to try and provoke some kind of a reaction from Syria, that they can then turn around and say, oh my goodness, Syria is attacking us, Syria is making war on us, help us, United States of America. And the U.S. will have its excuse to go back into Syria and say, we must help our friend in the Middle East against the evil tyrant Assad. But I don't think Assad is going to bite. And we know Israel likes to use a lot of false flags. And even Syria has gone to the UN saying that these so-called errant artillery shells that are flying into Israel and hitting nothing but dirt, that Israel uses as justifications for attack on Syria, that they're all false flags. Everybody understands how Israel and the United States are playing these games. Now, over in Iraq, everybody was kind of hoping that this whole Kurdish independence thing was going to settle down now that it looks like it's not going to happen. But apparently Iraq is now threatening to resume a full-on invasion of the Kurdish territory, saying that the Kurds are using these ceasefire talks to buy time to try and reinforce themselves militarily. So Iraq is just saying they're just going to go on in and grab it. And I think probably they have been encouraged to do so because the Kurdish regional government is starting to make deals for the oil underneath their territory with Russia. And, of course, the whole goal of grabbing all these Middle Eastern nations, as General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on years ago, was to control Middle Eastern oil, specifically what currencies it will be traded in. Now, as you know, a lot of members of the House of Representatives started putting together House Concurrent Resolution 81 to basically say that the U.S. Has to stop supporting Saudi Arabia's invasion of Yemen on the grounds that such involvement was never authorized under the War Powers Act. Unfortunately, the House leadership forced through a Rules Committee vote which changed the rules on House Concurrent Resolution 81, stripping it of its privileged status, which would have guaranteed a floor vote. And although the War Powers Act guarantees such a resolution privilege, the Rules Committee claimed that Yemen doesn't rise to the level of the War Powers Act applying. Now, what's really going on is this is not a Saudi war against Yemen. This is a U.S. war against Yemen using Saudi Arabia as a proxy. Because several years ago, there was a successful intervention in Yemen where Yemen's elected government was kicked out and a internationally approved U.S.-selected puppet regime installed. Well, the people of Yemen don't like living under foreign puppet rule any more than Iraq or, for that matter, the United States of America. And so they kicked their puppet rulers out. And what this Saudi war is all about is to basically force the Yemenites to accept that puppet ruler, to take it on back, and give up this idea of democracy and self-determination, which is so déclassé in this age of the New World Order. Now, turning on over to Korea, there's an interesting dynamic starting to happen over there. And it has to do with our relations, not just with North Korea, but with China. Because, as you know, the U.S. foreign policy toward China has been kind of hard to understand, where on the one hand, they're demanding that China help the U.S. corral North Korea. At the same time, the United States is down in the South China Sea trying to kick China out of the South China Sea. And so it's been very, very complex. On top of that, you have China is dealing with some economic difficulty, mostly because their major export markets in Europe and the United States have run out of money and are not buying their products. So basically, the 19th Party Congress in China has made it very clear that China's roadmap ahead is socialism with Chinese characteristics. So they're pulling back away from this idea of going toward capitalism because they're seeing how in the long run it has been very destructive of the United States and of Europe. And Xinhao even dared to venture, and they're reporting on it, the 21st century is likely to see capitalism lose its appeal, while the socialist movement led by China rapidly catches up. And they're absolutely right. Most people living in capitalist nations are very unhappy with their standard of living and the wealth inequality and the power inequality. And this is not going to go down very well in the West, even considering that the Chinese system is going to be more like neoliberalism with Chinese characteristics. And this is a repeat of what happened following the October Revolution in Russia that led to the rise of the Soviet Union, because then the Soviet Union became the banner carrier for socialism as an economic system, and that just scared the heck out of American bankers and industrialists who had built a society in which they had all the money and the workers worked very hard for very little money, and the industrialists and the capitalists became very, very rich, and they were just absolutely scared out of their minds that there might be a workers' revolt here in this country. And that was the beginning of this massive propaganda campaign to demonize the Soviet Union so that people wouldn't even consider the possibility that there might be a better way of running the economy for the general population. And so now I'm expecting we're probably going to see a huge propaganda campaign now crank up against those evil Chinese. Oh, they're a bunch of commies over there. We got to stop the commies. Now, here is a little bit of a surprise story. This is out of Press TV. And Press TV is reporting that the United States, despite Donald Trump's rhetoric, the United States is quietly pursuing direct diplomacy with North Korea. And Joseph Yun, the U.S. negotiator with North Korea, has been in contact with diplomats at Pyongyang's United Nations mission in New York City. They're saying the discussions are not limited, either in frequency or substance. So there's a lot of talking going on over there. Meanwhile, the war hawks are still out there. They're drooling. They want a new war in Korea. And we're seeing this propaganda. This popped up this morning in all kinds of multiple locations all over the place. It appears to have originated with The Sun, which is a tabloid. So take this with a grain of salt. But the idea is basically that North Korea could be preparing another missile test after brisk activity at Kim Jong-un's nuclear research facility, reports claim. Well, there's a problem with that headline because the nuclear research facility is not where the missiles are being built. That's a couple of different separate places. The nuclear research facility is the mountain where they were testing nuclear bombs, and apparently that is now out of commission for the foreseeable future. But based on reports from South Korea's spy agency, there's going to be another rocket launch. And now they're insisting that North Korea is just weeks away from a miniaturized, diversified nuclear warhead. In other words, they're repeating the same propaganda we've been hearing about Iran for the last 30 years, that they're just weeks away from a nuclear bomb. Now, let us say, for the purpose of argument, that North Korea has got missiles that actually work, and some of them do. And let us say, for the sake of argument, that North Korea has actually achieved a deployable nuclear warhead for these missiles. What is North Korea going to do with them? Absolutely nothing unless provoked. Nuclear weapons and the missiles to carry them are a very expensive investment for a country that's actually, very poor right now. They're not just going to throw them away. The reason for building a nuclear deterrent is to deter other nations from mucking about in your country. And North Korea has been accelerating this project while watching the United States government over the last 16 years go into country after country after country after country on the flimsiest of pretexts to commandeer their natural resources and take control of their economies to serve the American financial system. And North Korea does not want the United States in North Korea. They remember how bad it was the last time. And there's nothing wrong or provocative about North Korea testing a missile. All nations that with weapons development programs, they test those weapons to make sure they're going to work when needed. The United States tests missiles all the time. You've got the Pacific Missile Test Range out here on the next island over. They've been firing stuff out of there. Russia's firing test missiles from Plesetsk. It's only in the case of North Korea where testing a missile is all of a sudden a provocative act. Now, here's another little surprise. This is coming out of CNN, no less. The leaders of China and North Korea have exchanged personal messages, and North Korea is saying China's Xi Jinping wants to boost ties. Now, this would not really be very surprising because China understands that North Korea may be nothing but a front porch for the U.S. war against China and the yuan. And so better to have that porch and screen door on China's side than on the U.S. side. Meanwhile, we're getting reports, this is out of Zero Hedge, that China has practiced bombing runs on the island of Guam. I mean, they haven't gone to Guam, but they're practicing missions which appear to simulate a potential Chinese attack on Guam. So it looks like China has rejected the U.S. request to help get North Korea into line, and China is getting ready for a war, whether it's sparked by North Korea or the South China Sea. Everybody is getting ready, and that's very unpleasant. Now, as you know, Congress is looking at this 2001 authorization for the use of military force, which was only supposed to be about Afghanistan and possibly Iraq, and it's been used by every subsequent president to just say, yeah, I'm authorized to send our troops into Sudan and Niger and here and there and everywhere, E-I-E-I-O. And Congress wants to reassert their control over the war policy, and they're opposed by Mattis and Tillerson, who are saying they need a new authorization for the use of military force without any restrictions on it whatsoever, either time-wise or geographically. Open-ended perpetual war. That's what they're pushing for. And as a result, there's a call for a new, renewed anti-war movement. We'll be back after these few words. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And before the commercial, we were talking about how Mattis and Tillerson are out there saying we need an open-ended authorization for the use of military force everywhere on the globe for however long we want to do it, which I think has to be making the rest of the world's leaders very, very nervous right now. And adding to that is a revelation where the Turkish parliament, after 10 years of hemming and hawing and shuffling their feet, has finally acknowledged something that we've known about for a long time. 5 nations in Europe, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Italy, and Turkey, have U.S. nuclear weapons inside their military bases. 150 tactical B-61 nuclear weapons aimed at Russia, Iran, and whoever else the United States doesn't like. Here's the kicker. These weapons are under the military control of these nations, making them 5 non-declared nuclear powers aimed at Russia. So remind me again how Russia is the aggressor in all of this. Now, the B-61 is a major league weapon. So if World War III were to break into a nuclear conflict, it's going to spin out of control. I'm sure that Russia knows these nations have these nuclear weapons, and that makes them all targets. Now, over in Crimea, 2 natural gas pipelines have been damaged, and they're saying the indications are it was sabotage. Somebody's trying to sabotage those gas pipelines. There's a lot of that going on here. A lot of these wars, it's still about oil pipeline rights of way. That and the opium is why we went into Afghanistan, an oil pipeline right of way. Now, apparently, Volker is over in Kiev, and there's a concern that American ultimatums may restart the war in the Donbass. And basically, Volker is promising Ukraine U.S. aid in returning Ukrainian territory, meaning Crimea, and apparently trying to force Russia to drop the Nord Stream 2 project, which is an oil and gas pipeline that would deprive Kiev of transit revenue of around $2 billion a year. Now, Kiev has only itself to blame for all of this, because when Poroshenko took on over following the coup d'etat, first of all, he stiffed Russia for all the money Ukraine owed for oil and gas, and then he turned around and said, if Europe doesn't back me against Russia, I'll shut the valve at this end, because a lot of the gas and oil going to Europe goes through Ukraine. And that was a real threat. And so Russia said, here's an opportunity. We're going to do the Nord Stream 2 so that nobody can be held hostage by the flow of oil and gas. But Volker is now over there in Kiev saying that they're going to get Russia to stop making this pipeline. And now we hear that natural gas pipelines in Crimea are being sabotaged. This is what your kids are being sent into these wars, to be killed and crippled over oil pipeline rights of way. We'll be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to our show. Hour number 2, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Stepping back in the talking points a little bit, over the break, I did a quick little web search for articles about Antifa, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda, and there's a whole bunch of new ones, including apparently Interpol has now issued a warning that Antifa is plotting with ISIS and Al-Qaeda to oust Donald Trump. And apparently that is what they're going to be trying to do this coming Saturday. And this would certainly explain that email we got from the local Republican Party saying, don't go down, don't confront them. These people want violence. They want rioting. The media is going to be down there with the cameras, and what they want is lots of blood. To try and sell the idea that the American people are tired of Donald Trump and they want the Empress Hillary or whatever the situation happens to be. Now then, interesting little story that came on out. This is over in the Miami Herald. Over the last few weeks, there's been a little bit of a kerfuffle, if you will, down in Gitmo, where these lawyers who were supposed to defend the man accused of masterminding the bombing of the USS Cole wanted to quit because they were not being allowed to have attorney-client privilege privacy. They felt they were being interfered with. They made a request to the court to be released from the case, and ultimately they resigned over this covert breach of attorney-client privilege. And apparently the USS Cole case judge found the Marine general in charge of the war court defense teams guilty of contempt for refusing to follow the judge's order to basically drag these lawyers back and make them finish the case. And apparently now they're being ordered to participate in the penalty phase of this trial remotely from Washington, D.C. So they're really putting the bum's rush on this one. Guantanamo is full of all kinds of embarrassments to the U.S. government. And I think we're starting to see the program to try and make them be less embarrassing. Let's take a phone call here. Joe in Oklahoma. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Very briefly, Michael, it would only stand to reason with Hillary and her gang selling the uranium to the Russians that they would be trying to coddle her instead of Trump.
Oh, that's absolutely right. And as I said before,
I think it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure that Putin would have preferred Hillary to have won the election because he can blackmail her. Putin can't blackmail Donald Trump. He can blackmail her, and apparently he already did it once because while she was Secretary of State, the FBI arrested 10 Russian spies inside the United States, and Hillary worked to get them released and sent back to Russia just as fast as she could.
Yeah, it just turns my guts to listen to the news. But I'm listening to you.
Well, thank you very much.
I'm listening to you, my friend, and I appreciate all the good news. The news that you do put forth. You and RBM as well, and I like your advertisement for them.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for
Have a good day, my friend.
Same to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is kind of hard to keep up with all these scandals without a scorecard, isn't it? Going to have to take copious notes. There's going to be a quiz next period. All righty, getting on back here to the economic news. This is going to be another shock. Yesterday, we talked about how Russia and China are talking about extending their current arrangement to do business between their two nations solely in their own internal currencies and not go through the U.S. dollar. And now Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran is saying it's time to eliminate the U.S. dollar in all of Iran's economic transactions with Russia. So bit by bit, countries are turning away from the U.S. dollar, and that is the harbinger of an economic disaster for this country. Because going all the way back to the Bretton Woods Agreement at the end of World War II, the U.S. economic system got lazy. They had all this wealth just pouring in from every other country on earth that was forced to use the U.S. dollar for cross-border trade and banking, and they allowed our manufacturing to decline, And then to cap it off, they had that disastrous experiment with GMO agriculture. So nobody wants to buy our manufactured goods. They're overpriced junk, even our weapon systems. And nobody wants our GMO agriculture. And so right now the entire U.S. economic system is dependent on that revenue stream coming in from other nations being forced to use the U.S. dollar to buy natural resources like oil or to do banking and transactions across the border. But the world is turning away from that. They're turning toward BRICS. They're turning toward the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The Western economic hegemonic system, dollar-dominated, is falling apart. It's absolutely falling apart. And that's the reason for the wars, to basically go on out and conquer the world and bring them all back under the U.S. dollar, to revive the American empire. And it's going to fail. It's already failing. I wish there was somebody in Washington, D.C. who had the gonadal tissue to stand up and say, this is not going to work. It's time for a rethink all the way back. And the rethink would be, let's stop spending all this money killing other people in other countries. Let's bring all of our people home. Let's bring all of what remains of our wealth home and start rebuilding this nation. Get it back to being a manufacturing powerhouse. Getting back to agricultural produce other nations want to buy rather than are forced to buy through various arm-twisting international so-called free trade agreements. But unfortunately, Washington is caught up in its groupthink. Apparently, even Donald Trump has succumbed to it. Well, the latest enrollment period for Obamacare has just started. And it's going to be a couple of months before we know what the real numbers are. But experts are saying they don't think there's going to be a lot of sign-ups because of the skyrocketing premiums, 37% on average, and the deductibles are going up as well, making these Obamacare health insurance policies absolutely worthless for the money. Most Americans who are paying these huge premiums for Obamacare health-compliant policies will never use them because the average American doesn't go to the doctor enough to use up that deductible. The only time your health insurance will actually kick in is if you have a serious accident or illness. So, now, getting on back to this idea of we're going to blame Russia for everything. We're going to blame Russia for everything. As you know, because of Brexit, because of Catalonia, because of Kurds, and now we have Lombardia and Venice in Italy are talking about sovereignty. The Scots are talking about a second independence referendum, mostly based on the fact that they know the first one was stolen from them. The election fraud on that was so sloppy. It's not like they weren't even trying to hide the fact that they were just going to rig that election and steal the Scots' freedom from them. So the Scottish are now talking about a second referendum. Oh, well, we can't have that. We can't have that. So apparently here in the United States, Senator Angus King, who's basically on this committee into Russian interference in last year's election, is out there saying, well, Russia is behind this movement in Scotland for a second independence vote. You don't want to vote for independence, you're going to be working for the Russians. If you vote for freedom and independence, if you vote against the New World Order, you're obviously on the side of the evil Russians. Meanwhile, British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson has come on out and says there is no evidence that Russia meddled in the British elections or politics. And like I said, they've worn out this Russia did it. They've used it so many times it's lost its shock value. Nobody's buying it anymore. It's like when Israel screams anti-Semite. They've done it so many times, nobody cares anymore. Oh, you're an anti-Semitic Jew hater. All right, your opinion. Who cares? Now, apparently Spain is sending in police forces to Catalonia to basically nullify the democratic vote for independence, even though Spain is a member of the United Nations. And under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Spain is obligated to respect Catalonia's desire for autonomy and sovereignty. as is every nation in the European Union. And yet Brussels is fully on board with Madrid basically bringing back the ghost of Francisco Franco and turning Spain back into a fascist dictatorship. Because remember, at heart, the globalist New World Order is a fascistic system. That's what the New World Order will be, global fascism. We're going to take a break here for some commercials. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, getting on back to Spain. The Spanish court has issued a European arrest warrant for Catalonia's ex-leader Carles Puigdemont and several other local government officials who are currently in Brussels, according to local media reports. And basically, they're going to come down hard on these people for trying to exercise their rights under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, do you remember down in Texas there was this big stink following the hurricanes where people who were applying for financial assistance to replace their homes that were destroyed in the storm were stunned to find a condition in the agreement where they had to pledge they would not join the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement against Israel, that they were not part of it, and they would not become part of it while the contract was in effect, which is presumably until their homes get rebuilt. And it provoked a huge backlash and a tremendous amount of anger, and a lot of it's directed against Texas Governor Abbott, who seems to be more concerned with Israel than the people of Texas. Well, apparently over in Dixon, Texas, they decided they were going to pull back a little bit, and so that requirement for individuals to pledge they will not boycott Israel is now null and void. It's out of the agreement. Oddly enough, Dixon, Texas is saying businesses still have to reject boycott, divestment, sanctions to either get hurricane aid or the contracts for rebuilding. Now, basically, this is getting the residents of Dixon back to what should have been the case right from the start. And the fact that it's still being applied to businesses still tells us that we have way too many politicians in Texas who view Israel's interests as somehow more important than those of the people of Texas. And I think Texas Governor Abbott and every other politician who supported this idiocy needs to lose their next election. Stop listening to the campaign rhetoric. Look at what they're doing. It's time to get these Israel firsters out of our society. A government that serves two masters, or no government can serve two masters. A government that serves Israel cannot, does not, will not serve the American people. Right now, in these very treacherous times, America needs leaders who will put America first, second, and third. We have to have a zero-tolerance policy. These other countries, whether it's Iraq or Libya or Yemen, they don't like living under foreign puppet rule. Why should we be any more comfortable with that? Because that's the reality. We're living under foreign puppet rule. When the governor and the officials of Texas, in trying to deal with the Texans who lost their homes in the hurricane, are out there saying, oh, by the way, you can't boycott Israel while we're doing all this for you. That should have never even been a factor. Should have never even crossed their minds. Their first priority should have been, let's help the people of Texas rebuild. Period. That's where it stops. The fact that they put in this stuff about Israel tells you where their loyalties really lie. Now, as you know, part of this campaign of hate directed against white people is coming from Black Lives Matter and this idea that we are all collectively guilty for the sin of slavery against the black people. And the argument is rather weak for a variety of reasons. First of all, at the height of the antebellum plantation era, less than 2% of people owned slaves. There were actually black slave owners, interestingly enough. And now we're finding out that the very first slaves imported into the American colonies were white. They were from Ireland. And the corporate media likes to say, well, they were indentured servants, not slaves, but it was basically the same thing. They were grabbed from Ireland. They were transported to America on slave ships. the same ones that later on were used to bring the blacks in. Now, Black Lives Matter is out there saying, well, you all collectively share the guilt. Somewhere in your family there's a slave owner. No, in my family, we ran a station on the Underground Railroad. But I'm not going to go around to black people and say, you owe me money because my ancestors helped your ancestors. That would be ridiculous, wouldn't it? We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And, boy, this Donna Brazile piece is just getting a lot of coverage, and I hope she's wearing her Kevlar undies because basically blowing the whistle and confirming that, yes, Hillary was in control of the DNC, and Hillary and the DNC did put the shaft to Bernie Sanders, like they tried to do to the rest of America last November. Donna needs to be very careful that she stays out of small airplanes and suburban Washington, D.C. parks. So let's talk a little bit about computers and security. As you know, computer security is a joke. We have, between poor quality software writing and the state of the art in American software is deplorable right now. There's no such thing as a piece of software that arrives from the store in good working order. It's basically sold out, licensed on your machine, and then they rely on you to find the problems and send them in so that in version 2, available for a small update fee, you'll get something that works a little bit better. They just came out with iOS 11 for the iPhone and iPad to correct a bunch of problems with the first one. And I noticed already the bug with the calculator, they didn't fix that in iOS 11. That's still there. Now, Google is coming out with a new idea for people who are basically using the Google universe. And what they're doing is they're going back to the idea of what's called a dongle or a key. And the key will be available in 2 versions. One of them will be pluggable into a USB port, and the other one will operate over Bluetooth. But the idea is that when you're using this key and their system, you will not be allowed to view any compromised web pages, which may unfortunately include pages Google wishes to censor. But the idea being that if you're directed to a phishing site or something not approved by Google, you will not be able to get in there. Again, the potential for abuse, not sure I'm all that happy with it. Meanwhile, apparently there's yet another strain of ransomware, and this one is targeting people in Japan. More about this when we come back from station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before, this is hour number 3. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And before we get back to computers and science and more phone calls and everything, I'm reading this article that Donna Brazile penned for Politico. And we just posted it to whatreallyhappened.com. You must read this. The scale of the corruption that was going on, and basically what Donna Brazile found was that Hillary had basically come on in with Obama and rescued the DNC, which was hopelessly in debt, and then literally took over control of the DNC, put them on an allowance for basic expenses, and then other than that, used the DNC as another fundraising system to get around the limitations on contributions to a direct campaign. And I'm about a third of the way through the article, and it's just stunning. And apparently this was all being done without the knowledge of the other officials of the Democratic National Committee. Apparently the other offices of the party had no idea what was going on. This was strictly between Hillary and Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And Claire and I were at the point we're going to have to find some kind of a newer car. We love our Honda, 18 years old. It's showing its age, and it's still running, but we know it's only a matter of time before it dies. We're not going to get any kind of a car that's got automatic parking, no Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth. We don't need any of that. We'll accept a backup camera and maybe an internal GPS, because if you're using the GPS on your phone while you drive here in Hawaii, it's a $300 ticket, which sort of undermines the whole idea of having GPS. But yeah, I don't want one of these new cars with all these whiz-bangs. They're wide open. We literally cannot trust our government around our devices because they've all been compromised. Let's do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So before the station identification, we were talking about this new strain of ransomware that is targeting places in Japan. and it's called MBR-ONI. It's a bootkit ransomware, and it relies on a modified version of a legitimate open-source disk encryption utility called Discryptor for its encryption routines, the same tool that was abused by the Bad Rabbit ransomware last week. So these cyber criminals aren't even coming up with their own encryption. They're just stealing encryption from other legitimate products and using them. And apparently, security intelligence firm CyberReason believes the malware strains are being used as destructive wipers to cover up evidence of larger attacks, targeted attacks against Japanese companies, because the software behaves like ransomware, but there doesn't seem to be much in the way of ransom demands to go with it. Yeah, I'm getting emails from saying, Donna Brazil just came down with a case of Arcanicide. I think I mentioned this yesterday, but we're going to mention it again here. If your website is using WordPress, you need to upgrade immediately to version 4.8.3. And apparently the fix addresses a flaw that can be potentially exploited by hackers to hijack and take over WordPress-powered websites by injecting malicious SQL database commands. Now, they're saying the core installation of WordPress is not affected, but apparently it's just a way they can construct a request going into your server where they can get past and directly access your SQL server. I think at some point, somebody is going to have to stand up and say, these cyber criminals represent a clear and present danger to the United States, to its IT infrastructure, to its profitability, to its productivity, to its economy. We know that losses to cyber crime are in the billions and billions of dollars every single year. And yes, the government will come down hard on anyone who breaks into the government's computers, and they'll slap around students who are just amateur hackers trying to change their own grades. But nobody's going after the main cyber criminals. We're not even seeing an effort to try and find them, which means either the NSA is incompetent and really can't find these guys, or the NSA are the cyber criminals. And it's not a wild idea, because Kaspersky has come on out saying they think the Hacker Collective Equation Group is the NSA. And maybe all this cybercrime, ransomware, and everything else we're seeing is the virtual equivalent of the civil forfeiture laws. Just another way for a desperately broke, hopelessly in debt government to plunder and pillage the American people, to keep feeding that war machine. Now, there's a new threat out there. Actually, it's not really a threat. It's an annoyance. But apparently there is a sudden surge of malicious websites and malware and even apps that are hijacking your CPU to mine cryptocurrency. And the only way you're going to know that you might have one of these is that your CPU is sluggish, your battery runs down quickly, your device seems to be a lot warmer than normal. But apparently this rush to mine cryptocurrency, they're out there basically just trying to grab machines and build these huge cryptocurrency mining botnets. And again, it's theft. They're stealing your machine cycles. They're using your property without your permission. Okay, over in Germany, let's talk a little bit about human-caused global warming. Germany leapt on board the green energy bandwagon, if you will. Back in the 1990s, when everybody was screaming human-caused global warming, the world really was warming. Al Gore came out with his mockumentary, An Inconvenient Truth, and everybody said, we have to go green, we have to go green. And there were a lot of huge subsidies for solar energy plants and windmills. Most of them turned out to be boondoggles. They've never penciled out. And over in Germany, apparently by 2023, the subsidies are running out. The German taxpayers just can't carry these anymore. They're not producing enough electricity to justify the cost. And they're saying by 2023, more than a quarter of Germany's onshore wind farms may be gone. Now, that doesn't mean they'll be physically gone. They'll just sit there corroding away. We have an early wind farm down on the Big Island that hasn't been operational in years, and it's just sitting there corroding. We have a new wind farm up here on the north shore of Oahu. It, too, is not penciling out. A big part of the problem is that the company that made the turbines used in most of these wind farms, those turbines were supposed to last 25 years. And after just a few years, their parts are wearing out. The company that made them has gone out of business. They can't find spare parts for these units. And so some of them are they're basically locking the brake, feathering the blades on them, and just letting them sit. It was the fashion. We're going to be fashionable. We're going to be green. We're going to have windmills. We're going to have solar cells. How's it going to work out in the long term? Who cares? We're fashionable and trendy now. We're getting our subsidies now. We're getting our loan guarantees now. We're getting our tax credits now. And the reality is, right now, the world is cooling. And interestingly enough, they're saying, well, you know, the El Nino current, it's finally slowed down and the world is starting to cool again. El Nino is not caused by human activity. It's caused by undersea volcanoes. So we're seeing these swings in climate, all of which track back to natural geothermal and solar sources. All right, let's talk about Madagascar. There is a lot of concern over this outbreak of the Black Death, bubonic plague. And the World Health Organization is in there looking at this, and they're starting to say there's something different about this disease. It's not an exact match for the slate wiper that was in Europe back during the Middle Ages. They're saying there's something different. Its rate of contagion is higher. Its R0 is higher. And they're saying the outbreak can't be easily explained because apparently it appeared simultaneously in several towns. And this is just the start. Well, when you have a major disease like this that appears in one place, there's your patient zero. Two places, maybe hidden connection. When you have multiple sources all at the same time, you have to raise the question, is somebody starting a covert biowar? Because apparently these other 9 nations in the immediate area that have been warned of possible contagion, they're already aware of people who got from Madagascar to those countries. Now, here's an interesting little historical footnote. Since we just finished Halloween, and everybody's talking about cats and black cats and everything. Now, from the 12th century going on, there were 2 distinct attitudes to cats. For a lot of people, especially farmers, cats were important rodent controllers. And cats would sometimes go beyond merely being a working animal around the farm and be welcome inside the house. That's the origin of cats as pets. Working cats and house cats were always popular. But during the witch hysteria, the church put out that cats were always familiars of the witches. They were in league with the devil. Cats were literally being hunted and killed almost to the point of extermination. And Pope Gregory IX added his voice to the campaign against the evil cat. He wanted to stamp them all out. And it was because of this absence of cats. The rats whose fleas carried the Black Plague were able to run rampant across Europe, killing 25 million people. Sometimes you need to go on back and you need to look at some of the major goofs religion has done through the ages. When the Ice Age started and existing food crops started to go extinct, remember, the explorers were bringing back the potato from the New World. And the church forbade people to eat it because it came from inside the ground. It was obviously the fruit of the devil. And you literally wound up with tens of thousands of people starving to death while standing on an abundant food supply. Then there was the response to the plague itself, the flagellants, where they would go from town to town beating themselves bloody with whips and flinging the infected, contaminated blood all over everybody around them. And then, of course, you still have that adherence to the Big Bang Theory, even though there is more than ample evidence to suggest that needs to be sent the way of epicycles and the Earth-centered universe. Now, global temperatures continue to cool, but Jerry Brown is out there burning tons of carbon in his climate trip overseas. He's going around talking about global warming. We've got to deal with all of this, and he's in his own little jet there belching out burning kerosene from the back here. But the reality is that the global warming doubters, critics, such as yours truly, and Donald Trump, have now been vindicated. Even the United Nations has now conceded the Paris Climate Accord was a total waste. The UN Environment admits in its latest emissions shortfall report, even if everybody had signed up for the Paris Accord, even if they'd all met the goal for reduction of CO2, it would only have come to a third of what is claimed to be necessary to stop the world warming by more than 2 degrees Celsius by the end of this century, which is some 80 years away. But the world isn't warming. Remember, Earth's climate is dominated by solar output, which at the moment is at a low, the slowly changing of Earth's orbit, and of course, to a lesser extent, geothermal activity. But the politicians wanted more of your money. They wanted more of your obedience. So they came up with this idea that you humans are a danger to planet Earth. Oh, bad humans, no cookie. You're killing planet Earth with carbon dioxide. They even had the EPA declare carbon dioxide a toxic pollutant, which is ridiculous. Carbon dioxide is an essential component of the cycle of life here on Earth. Let's say that Lord Voldemort shows up, shakes hands with Al Gore, waves his magic wand, and all the carbon dioxide on Earth vanishes immediately. The Earth would die. It was just a grab for money and power. It's a hoax, a gigantic hoax. We're already seeing early snow coming to many parts of the country. And so there's another article over here where the National Weather Service models, even the National Weather Service, which was part of this whole thing, they're predicting a 99% chance this coming winter will start sooner and be harsher than any we have seen for decades. They're saying the amount of snow we can expect will be many more times than we normally get, and already there's a huge storm forming in the Pacific that's going to slam into the Pacific Northwest. This is life-threatening winter. Be prepared. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show and sort of finishing up on this whole climate gate thing. Apparently part of the new tax reform package is the elimination of the electric vehicle subsidy. And obviously this is something the oil companies are going to want to see happen because they want to bring people back to the warm embrace of internal combustion engines. But I think in the long run, we know that there's only so much oil down there. And yes, I think deep crust microbes are making more of it, that we're not in fact pumping dead dinosaurs into our fuel tanks, but we're burning it up a lot faster than those microbes can manufacture it. And the reality is we're having to drill down deeper and deeper to try and reach something that can be brought to the surface. Fracking has not worked out. It's caused more harm than good. And when you reach the point where it takes a barrel's worth of oil's energy to get a barrel of oil to the surface, it's over. Doesn't matter how much more is down there. For economic reasons, it is unreachable. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. So let's talk a little bit about glyphosate. And for those who are a little late coming to the discussion, glyphosate is the name of the chemical that is the heart of the Roundup weed killer by Monsanto. And Monsanto came out with this idea that they were going to have a weed killer that just kills everything. And then they were going to come out with special genetically modified seeds for crops like corn and soy and so forth that would be resistant to glyphosate. So the idea was farmers would buy these GMO seeds, they'd plant them all over their fields, and then they would just abandon all the old pesticides that they used to use, soak their fields with glyphosate, and all would be well. And it really didn't work out that way for a couple of reasons. First of all, the pests, the weeds, are developing a resistance to glyphosate. Apparently, the glyphosate-resistant gene has managed to jump species, producing what are called super weeds that can't be killed with Roundup. And so these farmers are having to go back to older forms of weed killers. But they still have to use the glyphosate, and they're stuck with those GMO seeds. Because once you plant your field with these GMO seeds, the pollen will remain there. And you can't plant a natural crop there. It'll be immediately contaminated. Now, complicating this is the fact that glyphosate itself has turned out to be highly toxic. So has the Roundup-ready food. There was a French study that was done a while ago where they took a population of rats and they broke them into 4 groups. The first group was fed natural corn. The second group was fed natural corn sprayed with Roundup. The third group was fed GMO corn. And the fourth group got GMO corn and sprayed with Roundup. And starting at 4 months, the rats began to exhibit tremendous medical problems, massive tumors, reproductive difficulty, and they kept the rats alive for their entire lifespan. This stands in contrast with Monsanto, which kept their rat population test going for just 3 months, and then ended it and said, no problems, it's perfectly safe to use. And Monsanto went to great lengths, including having one of their former executives put on the board of the science journal that published this French study to get it retracted. And then it has since been revalidated and republished elsewhere. They like to play dirty. Finally, then, we had the World Health Organization, which, despite intensive, massive lobbying by Monsanto, declared glyphosate a probable human carcinogen. And the word is they would have said definite human carcinogen, except for all the lobbying by Monsanto. And Monsanto has been trying to make sure that nobody can have GMO labeling in this country. There was that Prop 37 out in California where people want to have a choice. They want to know if what they're eating is coming from Mother Nature or from Monsanto's laboratories. And Monsanto doesn't want you to know that. So Monsanto went to all the corporate media in California and said, if you do not editorialize against GMO labeling, we will pull all of our advertising. And that's a significant amount of money. And corporate media, being corporate media, said, yes, sir, absolutely, yes, sir. And they came out against Prop 37. And Prop 37 was defeated amid allegations of massive election fraud. They rigged that election just to make sure. But Russia bans GMO, China bans GMO, a lot of countries are banning GMO, and now glyphosate itself is going to be banned across Europe. People do not want to be sold a product that they suspect may be harmful or dangerous. But the attitude of American corporations is, if it's making money, we will make you buy it. You're not allowed a choice. We're creating an agricultural monopoly here. You will be dependent on Monsanto for all food production into the future, just like you're dependent on the U.S. dollar for all global trade and banking, although that latter one is falling apart. But the glyphosate is everywhere. It's not just sprayed on the plants in the field. It's being used as a preservative. They spray it on produce in the supermarket. It's being sprayed for some reason on women's sanitary products. No idea why, but they are. And it is becoming ubiquitous in our environment. So apparently there has now been a study of 5 major brands of orange juice, and they're discovering that these are contaminated with glyphosate. Now, you would think normally that an insecticide sprayed on the outside of the orange, once the orange is peeled, that would be the end of it. But apparently this glyphosate, when it's sprayed on a plant, it gets inside. Which is why if your produce is sprayed with glyphosate, washing it won't do anything. Now, the World Health Organization basically deemed that concentrations of glyphosate between 4 parts per billion and 26 parts per billion was the range in which it was declared a probable human carcinogen. Obviously, at levels above 26 parts per billion, the risk increases, but that was the range that they used. It's basically 750 brands of glyphosate-based herbicides that are out there right now. So there's an organization, Moms Across America, that basically stated their research shows as little as 1/10 of 1 part per billion of glyphosate is capable of destroying beneficial bacteria in the stomach. the bacteria you need to properly digest your food and receive those nutrients. Repeated exposure to glyphosate weakens the immune system, which will lead to a potential of other health problems down the road. But it's making money. So they came on out with these tests. They went on out and they got these 5 leading brands of, several leading brands of orange juice, and they got 2 samples of each. They tested them independently, 2 separate tests, and they came up with 5. And they are Tropicana, which tested as 26 parts per billion, the upper end of the World Health Organization's range. Minute Maid, with amounts of 13 parts per billion, at least as sold by Jack in the Box. Stater Brothers House Brand Orange Juice, 4.93% parts per billion. Signature Farms, 6.33 parts per billion. And finally, Kirkland with 5.96 parts per billion. Obviously, Tropicana, that's horrible. So, Monsanto, of course, realizing that the writing is on the wall regarding glyphosate, they're trying to develop new replacement chemicals. Get them out there as fast as they can. We don't do glyphosate anymore. I don't know what you're all screaming about. The problem is glyphosate takes a long time to fade from the environment. Even if Monsanto stops selling it tomorrow, we're going to be dealing with this stuff for years. So basically, Monsanto came out with a new product, a new chemical designed to be applied to crop seeds called Nemastrike, and it's supposed to protect crops from worms. And it's already been given the green light by U.S. environmental regulators. Monsanto has had to pull this out of sales, production, release, because apparently people who are eating the food from these seeds, it's causing rashes. It's causing rashes on people. So let's get back on to fracking. We were talking before about how there's only so much oil down there in the earth. And even though the old idea that it's all fossilized plants and dinosaurs and finite, that has largely gone away. And it's understood that there are deep crust microbes who are basically taking methane, which is in abundance in the deep crust, and as part of the metabolic process, they're producing these longer chain hydrocarbons. The problem is we're burning it up faster than they can reproduce it. And they're drilling deeper and deeper into the Earth's crust, trying to find more oil. That's what led to the Deepwater Horizon disaster. And the experiment with fracking, where we know there's oil in all of this strata, and it's not in a big pool, so we can't put a pipe down there and suck it on out, but we'll just fracture up the rock and suck it out that way. And that was going to be the big shale oil revolution. And it has caused huge amounts of environmental damage. And even worse, it hasn't penciled out. They're not getting the volume of oil and gas they thought they were going to get, probably because so much of it is leaking into the environment. So there's an article out of the Daily Mail where basically the Environmental Protection Agency has been keeping track of methane emissions, but the numbers are based on estimates developed in the 1980s and 1990s and compiled through self-reporting by the industry. And satellite and atmospheric measurements are suggesting the EPA estimates could be underestimating the real-world methane emissions by fracking by as much as a factor of at least 2. Now, we've all been seeing these stories about how there have been these strange mass die-offs of fish in lakes and streams and ponds, and it always ends with, well, the water was depleted from oxygen. That's why the fish died. And that's where they leave it. See, here's the problem. We know that the fracking is releasing large amounts of methane gas. It doesn't stay deep down underground. It percolates to the surface. And as it percolates through water, methane will encounter free-floating oxygen. It will then spontaneously decompose down to carbon dioxide, which bubbles up and out of the water, and more water molecules. And a water molecule is a water molecule is a water molecule. And the net result is a body of water with no more free oxygen in it. That's what's depleting the oxygen and causing these mass fish die-offs. We've seen all these documentaries about people who have, these very nice homes they built in these rural areas, and then the fracking comes on in, and the next thing they know, there's gas bubbling out of their water faucets that they're able to set fire to with a lighter. And the fracking companies are coming on in and say, oh, it's just a hoax, it's a fraud. These people are making it up. They're just trying to get money from us. And these people have these homes. They don't want to live there because it's dangerous to live there. They can't sell them. Nobody's going to buy these things. And it shows once again just how fascistic our nation has become, because the interests of the oil companies, the interest of the money, are paramount over the interests of the general population in the eyes of the government. Now, I think fracking is going to come to an end simply because it's not turned out to be profitable. And by the way, there's a movie about this called Promised Land. I think that's still out there on Hulu and Flix, talking about some of the underhanded techniques the oil companies use to get these communities to say, yeah, sure, you can put a fracking well on my property, and we're going to make huge amounts of money, which they never do. And they're never told about the environmental damage, because it's not just the methane that's coming on up. The fracking fluid that is pumped down there to break the rock up, it is highly toxic. It is carcinogenic. In some cases, it's radioactive. We had somebody call into the show who used to be part of the fracking industry who said that the fracking companies are making deals with other businesses that have toxic waste disposal problems. And they've got these toxic waste pools, and they don't know what to do with them. There's nowhere they can dump them. So they make a deal. They pay the fracking companies who will take these toxic sludges, mix them with the fracking fluid, and pump it deep down in the ground for disposal. On the theory, it's going to stay down there, except that it doesn't. And it's percolating up through the fractured rock, because that's what fracking does. It cracks the rock. It opens up a passageway for the oil and gas to flow through, and along with it, the remains of the fracking fluid. And so it's getting on up into the surface of the ground. It's getting into the plants. It's getting into the feedstock for the livestock. This is a horrendous environmental disaster, and it's even worse because having pumped it deep down into the ground and allowing it to plume out from there, there's no easy way to go down and clean this mess up. The people who are living on these fracking lands are going to be dealing with this for a long time, and that's not even mentioning the fracking quakes. In areas where there's been a lot of fracking, all of a sudden they're getting quakes where they never used to get them. Oklahoma especially. Prior to fracking, Oklahoma got maybe one small earth tremor every quarter of a century, and now it's a daily occurrence. The quake that damaged the Washington Monument is thought to have been triggered by fracking. And we know that's a reality because many, many years ago out in California at 29 Palms, the Marine base there, they decided to get rid of some of their toxic fluid by pumping it into an earthquake fault. We'll just pump it on down there. It'll be safe. Nobody will go down there. And they started this pumping operation, and all of a sudden, they started getting dozens and dozens of small quakes. No big ones, no damage, but enough where everybody said, what the heck is going on? And they stopped the pumping, and the quakes stopped. And if you really think about it, it's easy to understand. If you're sitting in the chair in your hair salon, and the person with the clippers just pumps that little tiny pedal at the bottom, and it lifts you up, it's hydraulic power. Same thing with the lift for your car in the garage. It doesn't take a lot of fluid and it doesn't take a lot of pressure. It just takes a lot of area along that fault, and you can start pushing that fault apart and reducing the friction. And the fluid is going to act as a lubricant as well. Some very poor thinking went into the decision to allow this to move forward. The kind of reckless, dangerous thinking that you see is typical of fascist economic dictatorships. Now then, apparently there is a new report out on how a common acid reflux drugs have been linked to deadly stomach cancer. And apparently this in the journal Gut, proton pump inhibitors, PPIs, which are used to treat acid reflux and stomach ulcers, double the risk of developing gastrointestinal tumors. Again, it's a product that's put out there to make money, causes harm. Well, we'll make more money from you. Now, there's a new class of antibiotics. It's been brought out in this war between antibiotics and pathogens who develop antibiotic resistance, and the new ones are the fluoroquinolone antibiotics, and now it's being discovered they are inflicting irreversible damage. So you have young people who are athletic, vibrant. They're now bedridden, housebound. They have trouble remembering simple words. And they've all been damaged by this medication, fluoroquinolone antibiotics. And these are prescribed for routine ailments like urinary tract infections and prostatitis. And apparently the experts are saying it is irreversible. Once you have it, there's no way to undo it. It's permanent. What a reckless system Orthodox medicine has become. Article coming out of Feast and Famine, Blogspot, moms of vaccine-damaged kids, basically saying you need to look at what's going on here. Why is there an epidemic of peanut anaphylaxis? Because peanut oil used as an adjuvant in vaccines. U.S. children are the most vaccinated in the world and the least healthy. And they point out a reminder, the Amish people do not vaccinate. And they've got healthy kids. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we just reposted that video where a lobbyist for Monsanto was being interviewed and said, Roundup is perfectly safe to drink. And they said, okay, we got a glass. Go for it. And he says, I'm not an idiot. And he just split. You know, but lobbyists are paid to lie. That's their job. You can get the truth about things for free pretty much. You know, but a good lie pays big bucks in the United States of America. I'm looking here now, this story about Donna Brazile and her book and her revelations, it's already going around the world. It's already in the British press here, and they're talking about all the things that were going on about how Hillary's campaign was literally siphoning money away from the state Democratic parties during the primaries, to just try and keep control of the whole thing. And amazingly, Elizabeth Warren, who campaigned with Hillary Clinton, has come on out saying that she thinks Donna Brazile is telling the truth. So this could be really the beginning of the end. And it vindicates Donald Trump, who said that Hillary was cheating. It vindicates all of us who said Hillary was cheating. And you need to go back and look at all that was going on that year where, Hillary was getting the media questions in advance so she could prep for them for the debates. She had the teleprompter built into the top of her little podium, the little earpiece, all of that stuff. We kept pointing it out that she's not playing fair. And Hillary's people, oh, you're a kook, you're a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy wacko. No, we weren't. We've got it from inside the machine itself, how it was hijacked. Hillary Clinton apparently took complete control of the Democratic Party machinery months before she announced her candidacy. So you need to read that. I'm going to buy this book. I'm going to buy Donna Brazile's book. Absolutely, without a question. I want a copy of this one. So it's going wild. Now then, fun thing, as you know, I'm a science buff. Scientists have been using muons, these subatomic particles that can just fly through vast amounts of material. They rain down on Earth when cosmic rays slam into the atoms. They set up detectors around the Great Pyramid of Giza to basically X-ray it with the muons. And they've discovered a new hidden chamber that looks like it's basically a copy of the Grand Gallery above the Grand Gallery. Now, they don't know what it is, if it's just there to spread the weight, take the strain off the Grand Gallery, or if, in fact, it's something else. There has long been speculation that the available part of the Great Pyramid may have been a fake-out to discourage tomb robbers, and that the real tomb may still be hidden somewhere inside. But this is amazing that they're able to use this technology to see inside these giant stone objects. Speaking of stone objects, apparently the Stromboli volcano in Italy is kicking up a fuss. Of course, that's part of a much larger field of volcanoes that many people think may, in fact, reveal a supervolcano under that part of the world. So now Italy knows what it's like to live near Yellowstone. There's been an earthquake swarm near White Island in New Zealand. They're insisting it's got nothing to do with their volcano. So everybody relax. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below or like, follow or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.